Thank you for the recorder. Welcome, everybody, to the Kinship Mobilization Learning Community. If you've been here before, welcome back. And if you're new to the group, welcome. If you have received this invitation from someone else and you would like to be added to the calendar invites, we'll be running this through February of 2025, and we're meeting every other Thursday at this time. Please send me a note in the chat, and then I'll make sure that you get signed up and that you receive all the future calendar invites. So, good afternoon again. My name is Melissa Devlin. I am the Assistant Director at the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network here at Generations United. And for those of you not familiar with us, we are the first ever National Technical Assistance Center on Grand Families and Kinship Families. And we are working alongside with Marina and hosting this the Child Welfare Playbook, and hosting this learning community where we showcase the amazing work that's being done on kinship mobilization and kinship family search and engagement around the country. And if you've been joining us since the start, we've had some really, really great and interesting presentations with a lot of really helpful strategies. We want this to be practical. And we also want all of you to use the chat, put questions in there to let us know what you're doing that's working, especially what's being related to the topic for today. And I want to thank Marina so much for helping organize all of these sessions, and for those of you who are coming and presenting and sharing your own expertise. So with that, I will turn it over to Marina.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Excited for today. We have a lot of guest speakers, which I'm really thrilled about. So today's topic is kind of twofold. Primarily, it's about how can we engage kin earlier and prior to removal. Ideally, potentially sometimes engaging kin so that we can avoid removal entirely, because they can provide some of the supports that that family needs to work through their current crisis. Many agencies have told me that they don't think this is possible. And so my favorite thing when I hear that is to bring together a bunch of people that are doing it right now to share how they are doing it and what they are doing. So that's a lot of what we have today. And then a secondary theme that you'll hear through many of our speakers is about also ensuring kin have a robust presence at meetings. That sounds super specific, but I think thinking through that in your own jurisdiction, how you're inviting them, how you're making it possible for parents or youth to invite their supportive kin. Some of the logistics there can really make a big difference in terms of who comes and when they come and if they feel comfortable coming. So with that, Bob, I would love to pass it over to you and then have you kind of set the stage for our topic for today.
Thanks so much, Marina. It's a pleasure to be with everyone, and there's some familiar names and faces on the screen, although they were building so fast I couldn't keep up. But a pleasure to be here, and happy to kind of kick it off to start us on this journey. So just for a quick background, I'm the director of the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness at Seneca Family of Agencies. We've been in existence since 2010 and have provided training, coaching, consultation, collaboration, leadership development, and all kinds of technical assistance to organizations throughout the United States and in Canada and Australia to help really seed a kin-first approach that honors and supports families for being involved in all decisions around their kin. And we're very committed to the importance and the prioritization of ensuring that every young person has a network of support that's enduring and will last long beyond their child welfare development, since that's what the research says is the most important thing. It's more important than beyond the specifics around, do you have a forever family or any of those kind of things. I've just recently read a study that 70% of young people who were adopted by the age of 25 did not have a close relationship with their adoptive family anymore. And so it just really calls into focus that we can't be just determining what's that potentially nuclear family that we're plugging a young person into and we're going to walk away from and think that everything's going to be fine, because it isn't. I think we've kind of intuitively known that for a while, but the research on a daily basis shows us that that's not the case. I think one of the things that everyone is tackling right now, and it's nice that we're trying to tackle it, because even before we were the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness, I was part of the California Permanency for Youth project that was associated with the Stewart Foundation, with support from the Walter S. Foundation and others. And our focus at that time was creating permanency convenings. And some of you may remember some of those permanency convenings that were held in the Bay Area that brought people from all over the country in the early to mid 2000s to talk about this. And so at the time, that was like 50 or 100 people. And people wrote white papers, people communicated in all kinds of ways around thinking differently about at the time, what seemed inevitable experience that young people that weren't reunified were going to be growing up in the system, and that their families often never knew about their existence, or the families were demonized or marginalized in ways that they didn't feel like they could have any involvement with those young people. And so therefore, what's going to happen to them when they're 18? Well, we'll provide them independent living services. And the failure of that has become really clear from a research perspective. But those white papers and other articles that were written in the early 2000s are now present in a lot of the language that you see from the Children's Bureau. Like, stuff that we wrote back then is now become part of the foundation and has challenged the norms about that the child welfare system was really founded on, that family separation was the primary vehicle to safety, that it was the design was protecting children from their families instead of supporting families to help keep their children safe. And obviously there's some values associated with that, and those values emanated from the system design in the 50s. And have now become challenged, and via the research, it's for very good reasons. So, as the system is starting to rethink in all different kinds of ways, rethink what its values are, how it positions itself, what support is needed, what does safety look like. It's the recognition that actually what keeps young people safe isn't foster care. It's a network of support around them that provides them resilience, that provides them with protective factors, that provides them with love and belonging and support that every young person needs growing up. And that often young people who are separated from their families don't have, or it's a very narrow group that is somehow gets pitted against other people, usually people the young person is most connected and attached to. So that doesn't work, right? We know all that doesn't work. And so systems that have been starting to, or practice models that have started, 10, 15 years ago, signs of safety, safety organized practice, et cetera, really asked those engaging families at the very beginning is to ask questions like, who can gather around your kitchen table, your dining room table, whatever, in an hour? Like, who can we bring from your family, and family not meaning necessarily relatives, who can we bring together to start helping you create a safety plan for your child, right? And to think about safety in a different way, rather than if somebody is harming, or we believe somebody's harming somebody, we have to go put them in a separate family. Recognizing the trauma and the impact of removing them may actually be worse than anything that they're experiencing right now. And so that shift in focus, started getting installed 10, 15 years ago. There's still lots of installation that's necessary, but again, it's one of the things that gets us to pivot and think about things differently. So from my perspective, and from our organization's perspective, we really look at, for over a decade, depending upon where you are, maybe more, maybe less. Equity and disproportionality have been a primary focus for the failures of our system. And from our perspective, all the system upgrades and rethinking and training that the workforce undergoes, and maybe even their decision-making process within the structure of their organization undergoes, does not address sufficiently the factors that create disproportionality and inequity. And that the only way you're going to get there, it's not that you don't need other things, but without this condition or this situation, you cannot actually change the construction and address the disproportionality and the lack of equity unless families are at the table making decisions with the professional workforce about what will happen to their family and the young people that it impacts. It's impossible to create a situation in which there are people who are not associated with the family that are making decisions without the family. Because collaborative practice is shown to be superior than agency-centered practice. So what is the family-centered practice? What's the practice model? How do we get there? How do we make sure that families are present in all decisions about their young people? Because I will bet that everyone on this call, if there was a family member that was being impacted, you would insist that family members were at the table deciding it and not professionals that had no history of a relationship with a family. Like, you would insist on it, and might be to the point of over your dead body, and or over somebody else's dead body, and so we really believe that we have to create the situation where we get to family-centered practice and away from the history of agency-centered practice, that professionals know better, that social workers know better. There's an expertise. The expertise is required, but it's a collaborative expertise, not a singular expertise that's superior to what families know about what's going on and how best to address it. Okay. And so that's been our real focus in any of our advocacy, writings, collaboration, training, consultation, etc. Who's making those decisions, and challenge organizations to structure them in ways, to structure their process in ways that invite and welcome family, not just from a checklist perspective, say family can come, but then set the conditions of, but we'll tell you when, where, and how, and we'll define the agenda and the construction of what the meeting will look like. So I know I'm running out of time. I'll just spend another minute or two on some practices that have been going in this way either for a long time or relatively recently. There's two organizations that we have worked with, formally or informally with, one Olmsted County in Minnesota and one Epic Ohana in Hawaii, that have for decades involved family in decision-making practice, and that it really challenges that whole piece, Marina, that you were talking about people say, well, it's impossible. Well, these organizations have been doing it. I did a podcast with them, by the way, which you can find at familypermanency.org. These organizations have been doing this for such a long time that if their ratio of family members to professionals falls below 3-to-1 in a meeting, they're worried that they're not engaging well enough. So in many, it's like, can you get a child or a parent into a meeting that has 8 other professionals, and that's considered progress? Well, in theirs, it's like, if you have 6 family members, then you're having 2 professionals. And that's just a way for people to rethink, what does participation really mean? Who's running this meeting? Who has voice? Who has influence, right? And so there's a history around that. And Los Angeles County, as I'm sure many of you know, has been really focused on the front end, quote unquote, family finding work. We're moving away from that term family finding, over time, as a profession. And I don't really have too much time to go into that, but basically because historically it got translated into, did we do a search? and got to be very compliance focused. So Kevin Campbell is really pushing family seeing rather than family finding for lots of reasons, but that's one of them. So Los Angeles County has shifted their front end practice. So now they are at about 65%, and I did a recent podcast with them too. About 65% of their intakes are going in when they go into placement, they go with kin, but over 80% are ending up with kin because many of those young people don't even come into care. They go with family members and they don't require court oversight. And so from a practice perspective, we're starting to get there. We're starting to demonstrate it's possible and it's necessary and it's better. And so I'll just kind of cede it back to Marina around that, and I'll provide a little bit of some blurbs of information that help support these ideas. Marina?
Thank you so much, Bob. Incredibly inspiring at a big picture. And then I also love things like what Olmsted County is doing, where, here's a way that we can check in with ourselves. Are we over correcting for professionals? Or are we under correcting for making sure that kin are not only literally invited, but feel invited and feel like they're coming to the table?
Yeah, they do surveys afterwards too to see, do you feel like you're having an impact? And then they look at their data quarterly. And if their data shows that they're falling below 3-1, then they actually look internally. So what are we doing?
I love that. I love that. That's a really concrete tactic that everyone, I think, could hear and potentially act on. So thank you so much for coming today. So speaking of talking tactics, I don't see Tanya from Arizona, but Tanya, if you're here, holler. And otherwise, I will jump to Kathy in Michigan, who I think will talk exactly to this about how you're engaging kin in your FTMs prior to removal and what kind of impact you're seeing in Michigan with that practice.
All right. Thanks, Marina, for giving us an opportunity to talk here from Michigan. Yeah, I'm not sure, Bob, if what you're referring to is what we actually are doing in Michigan, which is our team decision-making meetings. When you mentioned decision-making, it made me think that it might be very similar to what the other areas are that you were referencing. So in Michigan, we implemented team decision-making meetings back in 2019 as a pilot, and we have continuing to expand to the remaining counties throughout our state. And if you're not familiar with the meeting, with the TDM, team decision-making meetings, they are in the clearinghouse as, I don't know if they're in there as a promising practice or an evidence informed. I can't remember how they are listed in the clearinghouse. They are through, initially, I think it was Casey Family Programs who started them up. And then now they're with Evident Change has the proprietary rights to the model. So just so you're aware of that, we went through Evident Change when we implemented this in 2019. But TDM meetings are held at different trigger points in a case. So at the first sign of when a child they're considering Protective Services is considering removing a child from the home, or a child has been removed from the home on an emergency basis, we hold the TDM then, as well as in Michigan, we hold them in other triggers. Also at the first sign of any kind of tension or issues within a placement, to try to look at placement stability, as well as when where you have a planned placement, and that can be a placement from, say, a foster home to a relative, or a relative to another relative, or any of those kind of positive changes as well. We also hold them when there is, when we're looking at moving a case from supervised parenting time or family time to going to unsupervised family and parenting time, as well as when we're looking at returning a child home or for reunification. And then we've also added in 6 months of a child being in care, we do what we call a permanency review. And so I just wanted to give you an overview of those are all the triggers that we hold these meetings at in Michigan. Now, one of our key key components of the TDM model is that we're engaging the families. Everybody is having a voice at the table. So we're bringing in not only the worker and the supervisor and maybe service providers, those formal supports, but the parents are there. It's very key that the parents are there, that their youth are there if they're age 11 or older. And then in addition to that, any relatives. And so when we define relatives in Michigan, it's not just by blood or marriage or adoption. It's also anybody that the family considers as a relative, or somebody who has a close connection to that family. That is also considered a relative in Michigan. So we tell the family, we talk to the family, bring in any informal or formal supports that they want at any of these TDM meetings. We really encourage especially the informal ones, those relatives. Could be a pastor, somebody from the church, a neighbor, anybody who they want to have come to those TDMs, but definitely the relatives. And so we encourage them to invite them to any and all TDM types. And what we have found that overall, the relatives are such a clear asset to our TDM process and discussion. So some of the biggest things that we see when relatives are present or participate in our TDMs are not only they not only support the parents in the discussion at the TDMs, but they also support the department or the agency in messaging any concerns to the department or to the family during the TDM. So like, for instance, in some of our TDMs, the relatives do a great job of explaining and supporting the department in regards to concerns and talking to the family about here's the concerns that they have, here's why we're meeting, and here's way that we can help you with the safety plan, how we can build safety around the family so that the kids don't have to come into care, or when they're going back home, how we can build that support system and that safety planning with the family. So the parents really then understand the support that's being given or that can be given by the relatives, as well as the ability to reach out to the relatives as part of their safety plan. Like here, if this happens, like if you, for instance, if you feel like you're going to go and use substances, contact this relative. They're in the meeting and they're saying, yes, call me anytime. Call me here. I will come and get the kids, or I'll be there as a support for you. Whatever that might look like for that case and for that family, whatever kind of supports is needed. And so it's really critical. We see that so critical to have relatives at the table every time, just as a support to both the parents and the children. And for our children who are old enough to participate, having that relative there just really helps them. It's somebody on their side in a TDM. Not to say you're taking sides, but that's the way it looks like when you're having meetings with families. And we want to really break that image of that it's us versus them. Like we all come together at this table together, and really help the children understand that the relatives are there to support them, but also to explain to them in ways that maybe we can't as a department, what the concerns are the department has with the parents, or sometimes they even read children's statements because the kids don't feel comfortable talking. And I will say, so during our TDM process, one thing about it is that they are facilitated by a TDM facilitator who's trained in the model, who doesn't carry a caseload, who has, they're not involved in the case other than facilitating this TDM. So they are really skilled at moving the discussion along during the TDM, but making sure that everybody has a voice. And they're watching for verbal and nonverbal cues during that TDM and really calling on people to say, hey, I noticed that your face, like you had a reaction. Can you tell us what that means? So really getting input from everybody so that when a decision is made at the TDM, which a decision is always made at the TDM, that everybody has input in the decision, and hopefully everybody agrees with the decision. But if they're not able, like they might not be in agreement with, say, a kid coming into care, but they understand the reasoning behind it and how they can still support the family and how we can, and the youth, and how we can still gear our safety plan around involving that relative in that decision, whether it's be a placement with the relative or a placement with a non-relative, whatever that might be. So I know I talk pretty fast, so I hope that's what you were looking for, Marina, but I will pause for a minute here.
No, that was absolutely fabulous. That was detailed. I feel like other jurisdictions could hear that and could potentially start doing that themselves. If there's any questions, I know you have to jump in a couple minutes. Happy if folks want to drop them in the chat, or we can follow up afterward, I'm sure. But thank you so much. That was a really fabulous story and example of how Michigan is doing this work.
Yeah, and if anybody, wants any more information, like I said, we can talk about how we've implemented it in Michigan. Like I said, we just started in 2019. We've seen some good outcomes from that. And we continue to expand to the remaining 83 counties throughout our state. So if anybody has questions like, how'd you do that? Or how did you have separate staff or whatever it might be? How did you involve relatives? Like, how do we actually do that? Feel free to reach out, and I can answer your questions. And then also Evident Change, like I say, that they have the rights to the TDM model, and they can come out and train your staff and work with you on that as well.
Great. Thank you again for sharing. And we will include those notes in the after meeting notes that we'll send out for everybody. Next up, Stephanie from Connect Ohio. I'd love for you to share about the youth-centered roundtables.
Marina, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm wondering, am I able to share a slide deck, or would you prefer me just to walk through the information that I have?
I think you can. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You should be able to share. If not, we can turn that right over to you.
Perfect. I think that I'm sharing now. It just wouldn't give me the option before. Okay, perfect. So wanting to introduce you all and walk through a little bit of Youth-Centered Permanency Roundtables, or YCPRT, because we all love acronyms in child welfare. So we're just adding another one on top of that. The organization that I'm a part of, like the slide said, is Connect. And our sole mission in all of our programming is to build and strengthen kinship connections and inclusive support networks for children, young people, and families. We have a series of programming that supports this mission and the vision of our organization, like Connected Family and Ohio Can, both of which are working towards Clearinghouse, in addition to some training support that we have through Connect You. And our website has all of that information available to you. But today we were asked to specifically talk about YCPRTs. And at its truest and most straightforward approach, YCPRTs put youth, the actual youth and child that we're attempting to serve and partner and collaborate with, at the center of important meetings designed to lead to lifelong connections, with the goal of establishing legal permanency. They work solely at the discretion of the youth who's actively participating and driving the process. It does include youth preparation as well as support preparation process, so that we were not just inviting youth to a meeting, we're having a series of conversations with them and activities designed ahead of the meeting to prepare them for those discussions and for them to be able to come to the table and be an active participant in meetings about their permanency and their journey. We partner with them to identify and invite the important people in their lives to join these meetings. And then during the process, the youth have support in building these lifelong connections. We do utilize tools like genograms and mobility mapping and family trees to get to those places individually with youth as part of the element in addition to the meeting. At the end of the day, though, the goals are threefold. One, how do we expedite legal permanency for the young person that we're working with? How are we simultaneously stimulating thinking and learning about new ways to accelerate permanency, which in turn inevitably helps us identify and address systematic barriers to timely permanency? So here in Ohio, we have over a dozen sites that are implementing currently YCPRT through some various types of implementation and support, all also reaching this multi-level strategy. First and foremost, it's the individual youth that we're serving at that micro level through this type of professional case consultation. But then inevitably, it has a ripple effect, which we're all hoping to achieve, right? In this system change that we're striving for, that helps impact the team members and professionals that are part of these meetings. We see over and over again where we have potentially an assigned worker who's a part of a YCPRT that learns or uses a creative strategy and then ends up using that same strategy with another youth, even if they aren't receiving a YCPRT. And so that ripple effect is really impactful, which we know over time and through more and more youth served leads to a macro level change, our hope for macro level change and system improvement. We do look at permanency from that kind of broader view. It is not just the legal approach. It is not just attempting to find a family to insert a child into, but how are we meeting the goals for permanency around parenting, social connectedness, lifelong intent, unconditional commitment, and then belonging, which we know is so critical, not just to quality of life, but also to physical and mental health in the short term and the long term for the children and families that we're working with. What makes YCPRTs unique? They are a structured meeting framework. There is an agenda, there is documentation, of course, because we can't do any of our work with that really important piece, but it actually supports not only a recipe that we know works, but it also supports predictability for the youth to know what they're walking into. That every meeting has a strength bombardment piece where everyone's going to take a few minutes to talk about what is going on amazing with this youth. And they know that we're always going to end with a review of the action steps that have all been agreed upon in the current meeting. So there's some predictability and comfort in how the youth can show up in these meetings and in these conversations. They are in depth. So they're solely focused on permanency. This is not case planning. This is not visitation. This is not did the youth take their medication or not. These meetings are all focused on permanency. And by positioning it in that way and providing some training and support to our professional teams that are entering into the space, we cultivate a non-blaming environment. It is not about what someone should have done in the past. It's about what can we do now to help support this youth as a team in this relentless pursuit of permanency. Really thinking from a mentality of how do we throw everything in the kitchen sink at this situation to achieve permanency and increase connections for the youth that we're serving. It wouldn't be a good PowerPoint if we didn't have a fun data slide. So this slide here just gives a brief snapshot of what we've actually heard directly from youth about their thoughts about experiencing YCPRTs. So as you can see, these kind of like gear levels here, our youth that we've been able to get feedback from who've experienced YCPRTs feel like the facilitators respecting their wishes and opinions. They feel satisfied with the overall meeting process. They feel like the facilitators are easy to understand, our trained team members, and that youth felt like they could talk about the things that were important to them. And so we think it's really critical that we're checking in with youth about, does this process actually work for you? Does it meet the needs when we're trying to achieve an opportunity for you to be at the top of this table that we're working with? There is a really strong support in addition and in tandem to the youth focus as a support focus. How are we continuing to strive to increase that circle of support? How are we adding and reaching out to more support members and providing them with the same type of preparation? So they're not walking in to what is a professional meeting. It's held by a child welfare team, not prepared. How can they show up in an opportunity to advocate for the youth and what the youth's desires are, and for their desire to have this youth as a continued part of their life and ways to move it forward? So there's a role for everyone. When we talk about kind of this welcome to the table approach and preparing each individual that's attending to be well prepared and geared in for the conversations. This visual here is supposed to represent kind of seats around a table. And it is, I will acknowledge, a professional heavy meeting. That is done by design in order to put in some decision makers at the table, as well as what we're hoping is an unbiased facilitator, a neutral facilitator who's helping to hold the whole team accountable, including the caseworker and the supervisor. We partner with a lot of external supports as well. We want to bring everyone together that's helping to support the youth. So sometimes that's a Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter. We invite them to the table. Sometimes that is someone who's doing specifically family search and engagement for the youth, like a Connect to Family specialist. We're asking them to come in addition to inviting as many supports as we can. Our goal is over time, as YCPRTs continue, because they our reoccurring meeting is that the number of supports grows at every single meeting. And so that's a metric that we can follow. If the first meeting has this X number of supports, how do we make sure that that number is increasing every time the team is meeting, and what action steps can happen in between the meetings to ensure that that number is increasing and that the youth is helping to drive that increase of support. Some of the strategies that we utilize for YCPRT is just what I mentioned, and really harnessing the youth and their supports. How are we putting them in really prime position for conversations and action steps and accountability? We're engaging all family and finding dads. We are bringing as many individuals to the table in really creative ways, and really using a progressive definition when it comes to family and kin and what supports look like for youth, and the type of supports, particularly our older youth, that we know they need as they move into adulthood. We're facilitating those connections by building up that network and breaking down some myths and barriers. Whether something was done in the past, or a family member was potentially denied placement in the past, or maybe there was some maybe mishandlings. How are we breaking that down, having hard conversations to be able to overcome those for the sake of the youth and the next steps in our work with them? We do a lot of unpacking the no, whether that's with the youth, with the agency, or with the supports. How are we finding creative supports and community resources that can be utilized by the caregiver and the youth to position them for success as we're hoping to achieve our caregiver support for our kinship teams, as well as generating some creative ideas. How are we really thinking and pushing ourselves in these meetings to think of, what have we tried before that we want to try again? What haven't we tried that we really feel like now is the time to give it a try, and moving things forward and challenging some values, beliefs, and attitudes that at times can really permeate some of these spaces, particularly with this target population. So YCPRTs are specifically geared towards a targeted population. And this is our older youth. So typically our 12 years or older, although we do have some jurisdictions and certain situations where we are inviting youth that are 10 or 11 to the table to have conversations. We're currently serving a youth in some congregate care reduction work who is 9. And so we're inviting him as a 9-year-old to the table in these conversations, and using YCPRT as an approach to step this youth down from a congregate care setting into kin in a least restrictive situation. When I mentioned it being a reoccurring meeting, our ideal is that YCPRTs are happening every 90 days. In our congregate care reduction work, they're happening faster, so every 90 days, because there's a lot of heavy lifting that happens in that specific situation, in tandem with having and identifying community and professional supports for the caregiver and youth and step down. These meetings, we found through the pandemic, can be successful virtually. It's very interesting as our sites navigate deciding whether they should be virtual or in person. YCPRTs can be successful in both. There's a little bit of trade-offs, as I'm sure you all have kind of felt as you've experimented or moved back and forth between virtual and in person. Our virtual, we tend to have a lot more participation. We have a lot more people on the call. There's a lot more accessibility for supports to be able to attend, because travel or childcare are not necessarily a challenge. Part of what we include in our support preparation prior to the YCPRT is some technology support. How do we make sure that the connection works, that they can get onto the links, that there aren't any firewalls that might cause an issue day of the meeting? We try to mitigate all of that ahead of time in order to make the virtual meeting as successful as possible. The trade-off, though, is that some of the engagement isn't as strong as we would like it to be, and that we do see in person that the engagement and the strength of the engagement tends to be higher with a slightly lower number of actual attendees. So trying to balance the two, and is there a youth situation where one or the other might be preferred, and making an intentional decision about that. The how I mentioned earlier, there is a structured phase. So we have all of this information on our website, our YCPRT website. that has information specifically about this work and the detailed phases, as well as some resources and our contact information as well.
Thank you so much. We will include that in our after meeting notes. If anyone has questions for her, feel free to drop them in the chat. So next up, Nick and Rachel from Pennsylvania. I was hoping that you could share more about Pennsylvania's policy that you can engage kin from the first time that you're engaging a family, which in many places, many agencies on here think that they have to wait until a child is formally removed before they can engage kin.
Yeah, sure, no problem. This is Nick Purnell. I'm the county manager of our ongoing family services department in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. And it's really actually a pleasure to talk, but also a pleasure to learn and hear from the other counties in particular, or I'm sorry, states in particular, Kathy, Stephanie, and Bob from the beginning. A lot of same themes. I think what I have observed in our county and our state is a lot of the same themes that were already previously touched on, sort of changing the stigma of what child welfare was and creating into a much more strength-based, positive, and supportive idea into what it is today. There's some barriers, of course. I think we're still trying to work our way through them, but really it does change. It changed really about 10 years ago. I believe it was Act 55, 2013, in regards to family finding, where we really tried to attempt to change who we are as a child welfare agency. I have found that the success of each county in our state is sort of driven by staffing. And so we happen to have been in a very good position over the last several years in terms of casework availability and able to not only ensure the safety and well-being of children, but also go a step or two beyond in terms of changing what our role is in the community and really trying to cast the net, working with families really on visit number one and have those conversations with children, children in schools, children in their homes, and families as a whole. Who are your supportive network? Who can we count on in terms of if you need babysat or if your parents go to the hospital? Who is at your home for holidays? We really try to start those conversations literally at the first contact with the child, even in the investigation stage of a child abuse report. So I think for the most part, it's just really trying to undo maybe a decade or more's worth of stigma related to child welfare. It wasn't always like this. And, we still have employees and management members that have come from the previous version of child welfare. And it's just a challenge to continuously try to grow. And it's been a really great experience for all of us in our particular county and across the state of Pennsylvania. I thought our numbers were pretty good in terms of kinship placement percentage until I heard Bob say what Los Angeles is doing over there. So we've got some goals to shoot for in terms of ensuring our placements are with kin, family, friends, etc. We're currently in the 60% range. It's a number that we are proud of and we're always trying to improve upon. But really, it does start with a little bit of what each and every speaker has talked about so far in terms of changing the idea and mindset of child welfare into a supportive net casting, supportive networking practice as opposed to a purely punitive industry as it was before. That's sort of where we're at in Pennsylvania, and I appreciate everybody else's input. It's certainly beneficial for me to hear their tactics as well.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. And we're all on a growth journey, right? So don't be not proud of your 60%, but maybe keep coming to the collaborative and we can all learn from one another about ways we can keep getting that number up. Do you know offhand, and you might not, that when you made that policy change, I think you said in 2013, did that help kind of unlock staff to do this work that maybe they were reticent to do prior to it being explicitly allowed?
I think unlock was the perfect word. It unlocked the opportunity to grow as an agency. Unfortunately, it just takes some time. Being our particular child welfare agencies are county run. So we have 67 counties in Pennsylvania and 67 different county agencies that take care of their own jurisdiction. And so by the time you build in new staff into the budget, and then you wait the following year for the budget to go into effect, and then you do family finding specific training, it just seems like maybe it's just kind of a slower run up in terms of changing our identity of who we are. But that policy, Act 55 of 2013, definitely unlocked a sea change in terms of who we are.
Awesome. Well, we will include that in the notes of the language for it. Great. And then Leah and or Wanda from Washington, D.C., you guys have a policy change along these lines too. I was hoping you could share about your ability to contact kin, even perhaps if parents are not as forthcoming with their information.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, I'm Wanda Tolliver from DC Child and Family Services, and Leah Walker is also on.
Hello.
Leah.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Hello.
Yes, hi. I'm Leah Walker, and I'm with DC Child and Family Services Agency as well, and I'm the in-home administrator here at the agency.
And I'm the hotline and investigations program administrator.
And
yeah,
so
you guys were held up to me as an example when I was asking any other agency about this. They were like, oh, DC has a really great policy about this. So I was hoping you could share about how you're able to contact kin as early as possible.
Okay, well, the thing about us is because we are a local jurisdiction, I think we have a little bit more flexibility as it pertains to investigations with our families and our practice. And we've been doing kinship for quite a while at DC Child and Family Services Agency. We have a whole kinship unit, which comprises of a program manager, supervisor, and social workers who work with families, vetting families, helping families to get licensed. But from an investigative standpoint, one of the things that we do is we are doing what we used to call contingency planning, but we have changed it to be in alignment with the in-home administration and out-of-home administration, and we call it concurrent kin planning, which means that at the time of our investigation, we're asking the families, who would you want us to contact in the case of an emergency, a separation, that type of thing. So they will give us that person's name. We document it in our child information system. The social worker reaches out to that person and asks them if they are willing to be the concurrent kin plan for this particular family. So that's one of the practice things that we do.
And so just to tag team and add to that, so for the in-home side, I think one of the things you're mentioning related to the policy that we have in place that allows us to engage kin when we don't have consent. There was years ago, and this was put into place 2018 for us. One of the challenges we were seeing with the in-home families is that for months or weeks, we would get to the point working with the family, and then we get to a separation or removal, and we didn't have any relatives identified when the emergency would occur. And one of the things that came out was like, well, what is in-home doing? Y'all not engaging kin, you're not working with kin, you're not, what's happening. And you're not making reasonable efforts to engage. But what was happening is that we just didn't have the consent. Parents were not identifying them. There was reluctance to share that information. Privacy and confidentiality laws kind of prevented us from reaching out to families in different stages of the game. So we had determined that we needed to come up with some other policy that would help us in certain situations engage kin, even if the parent doesn't consent. So we've identified a few different areas where we're able to do that, and those buckets include if we feel like a separation is pending or is imminent. And a couple examples of that would be a child is in the hospital, maybe it has significant medical conditions, but they're not ready for discharge and the parent can't be located. Then we can start to reach out to relatives, using our diligent search, which is an area that Wanda Tolliver oversees. They'll pull up a list of all the family connected to the people. We'll go through and do our case mining through the record to see whether or not we have individuals that are, because a lot of our families are kind of repeat and return to the system. So we have some history and we've had previous contacts. So there may be information about other relatives. And so we'll reach out to those relatives during that time to see if we can possibly increase the chances of having a licensed kin at the time of the separation. And then another time is when we do our community papering cases, which is we try to get court oversight through the neglect courts. Most of the time we're asking for the children to remain in the care, but we have some time to plan. And so during that period, we have been given the okay to go out and reach family when the parent may not consent to that. And the last one is when we revoke protective supervision for our court cases and the possibility of us reaching out to relatives without that consent. So I think that is something that has helped us in increasing the chances and getting relatives involved, but not only in the event of a separation, but sometimes it's helped us to actually prevent the separation. So there are, there are multiple things that we try to do to try to increase the kinship, but those are some of the key things, our contingency planning or concurrent kin planning, as well as that policy that was put in place 2018.
And to also piggyback on that with our attorneys that we work with, it because kin is so important for kids and youth, right? Even our judges have gotten to the point where, and our guardian ad litems have gotten to the point where when we know that we're going to petition for shelter care to bring the kids into care, the judges and the GALs are very firm that they want us to have explored kin, and they want the kids and the youth to go to kin, whether it's family kin or fictive kin. So that makes us even, more diligent about trying to search out kin. And also once children are separated and they enter into the foster care system, we have this thing where it's 60 days to kin. So even if they have to go to a traditional resource parent's home, the ongoing social work team are still case mining, reaching out to members of the family to find out if there's any viable kin. So.
I love this so much. Thank you for those examples. This is so concrete. And we will share out DC's policy on that too, for those of you on here that maybe don't feel like you got that permission or from Pennsylvania to unlock this contact.
Yeah.
We have a question. Can you?
But I just wanted to add that I think it's so key that if you can get your legal community and your judges and your GALs and everybody to recognize the importance of children being placed with their families, with kin. So I think that can shift the whole system when you get that sort of buy-in.
Yeah. So I have a question for you actually on that. Can you say a little bit more about how did you create such a kin first culture? I mean, you've got the judges, you've got the GALs, you've got all of you. Like, how did you do that?
For a long time? I'm telling you, I'm trying to remember. Leah, do you remember the year we started? And then we developed like this kin first whole thing. We were at the
years of work. Our director, who just left, Robert L. Matthews, was the huge person that we brought in years ago, maybe 10 years ago.
I think it's been more than that. It was before we came to our new building that we're in. I'm thinking it's like 2011, something like that. So we had this whole campaign around kin first. Mm-hmm. And he was the person who helped us to really develop it and recognizing that we needed dedicated staff to help us, with the whole vetting kin licensing kin, because we have the ability to do provisional licensing. So doing all of that and having trainings with our staff about how important it is for kids and, sharing some of the research about how kids do better when placed with kin, more stability and things of that nature. So we've been doing this for a really long time. And we've had directors and executive leadership who have believed in it and buys into it, and our agency believes in kin. We definitely believe in that.
Yeah, and I do want to just add one additional thing about the concurrent kin planning process that we use. That is another piece that I think has been very helpful for us, and not only planning for kin in the time of a separation, but it also helps us to plan with our families on the in-home side and sometimes with the investigations, so that families can stay together. And it's different from our safety plans because in our safety plans, it's very clear that we can only plan when someone is clear of mind, doesn't have any impairments that'll impact their judgment or maybe their awareness of planning. So we wouldn't be able to safety plan with a parent who maybe had become unconscious because they had a medical situation or because they were under the influence of some drugs or alcohol. So with our concurrent kin plan, the nice thing about it is that we have developed it with the family at the time when we are meeting them. They're clear of mind, there's no concerns at the time. They identify this individual. We do some vetting of this individual in that moment. So if later we come to a point where there is some kind of crisis or something where the parent cannot care for their child, whether it's medically or related to continued abuse and neglect, we're able to call that concurrent kin plan and make a temporary plan until we can do a further assessment and determine what we need to do long term. And so we've seen a lot of progress in just being able to stabilize families. Sometimes it ends that we do still have to go to separation, but we know we've done all we can, and we've even used some of them as becoming the emergency kin licensed person for the child if they come into foster care. But at the same time, it helps support so somebody can go to treatment, somebody can get the medical care they need, and we don't have to separate the children. And so that has been a big win for us with our concurrent kin planning.
Yes, and even in the investigative phase, when we are doing the concurrent kin plan, we ask the caregiver who would be the person that they would want us to contact in case of any type of emergency. And then we contact that person and we verify, say it, and it's entered into the child information system that the person, they agree, their telephone number and things of that nature. And sometimes when we've had to utilize that, they will say, well, I can't do it right now in case of an emergency, right? But such and such could be considered if we have to do a separation. So it helps us to build on those family relationships.
That makes complete sense. This was a really inspiring story. Thank you both so much for coming and sharing today. A couple other just quick notes that we'll send out in the after meeting notes, but Broward County in Florida, along with Harvard GPL, worked on this guide to finding and engaging relative and non-relative caregivers that had some special sections about this. So we'll highlight those for folks to reference. And then as a next step, if you need help enabling contact with kin prior to removals, as you've heard, there are agencies that are doing this. It's having really positive results. Please reach out to the network for technical assistance, and we can connect you with those that have policies or legislation or whatever it may be. And then start thinking about, what's one additional step that your agency could take to engage kin earlier? Can you start measuring, like Olmsted County, how many kin you have relative to how many professionals you have at meetings, and then see if you need to lean in, or like Michigan is doing as well, and can you measure that? And for those of you that have been working with me for a while, I got a new puppy. So if anybody would like, I got a request in the DMs for some puppy visual. So please enjoy some puppy. This is Fiona. Okay, thank you guys all so much for coming today. We will see you next time.